Evelyn Monroe was once the backbone of her unit, a Marine who carried wounded brothers through enemy fire without flinching, without hesitation, and without needing recognition. But on a freezing Thursday morning in Fair Haven, she wasn't a hero. She was a problem. A 72-year-old woman, hunched near the back of a downtown cafe, arrested for trying to stay warm beside a kitchen exhaust vent. To the officers, she was a trespasser. To the city, just another case file in a system that prized order over memory. And so, the same hands that once dragged fellow soldiers out of burning vehicles were now locked in handcuffs, shaking from cold and disbelief. In court, no one asked who she was. No one cared until she finally spoke. Sergeant Evelyn Monroe, United States Marine Corps. And just like that, the entire room went silent, because someone in that courtroom recognized her name. Someone remembered the mission, the sacrifice, the life she saved. And suddenly, the story wasn't about a homeless woman trespassing. It was about a nation's failure to protect the very people who once protected it. This isn't just Evelyn's story. It's a warning. A reminder that dignity isn't optional, and justice means nothing if we forget who it's meant for. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments and tell us, does your town have an Evelyn Monroe, someone who gave everything and was quietly pushed aside? Let's bring their names back into the light. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that prove no one gets left behind. Courtroom 4C had seen plenty of forgettable cases. No one noticed the next name on the docket, Case 18B, vagrancy and public disturbance. The prosecutor barely looked up. The gallery paid no attention. This was a routine nuisance until the woman appeared, small-framed, wrists cuffed, head down. Evelyn Monroe shuffled forward in a military jacket 2 sizes too big. One sleeve dragged over her handcuffs. Her shoes were taped at the seams. People saw an old woman, homeless, irrelevant. Name, the clerk asked. Sergeant Evelyn Monroe, United States Marine Corps. Silence. It hit the room hard. No fanfare, no theatrics. But it was enough. The judge's pen halted mid-stroke. A few seats creaked, phones lowered. Someone coughed into the wrong kind of silence. Evelyn stood still. The charges were petty, loitering, trespassing, resisting a patrol officer. The court had heard it all before. But now, the context had shifted. Monroe was no longer anonymous, a Marine sergeant on trial for warming herself by a restaurant vent. The contradiction was stark. Judge Olivia Parker narrowed her eyes. The name was familiar. Not coincidence, not a fluke. The past was stirring in her mind. But she said nothing. Evelyn's presence spoke louder than any outburst could. She didn't plead, she didn't justify. She stood, shackled, waiting. The prosecutor resumed his routine. He referenced police reports, prior citations, business complaints. His tone lacked the confidence it had minutes earlier, a few lines into his statement. He stumbled, recalibrating under the new weight of the defendant's name. The room shifted. Reporters who hadn't planned to file this case were now typing furiously. A Marine, arrested for trespassing. That was a headline, a few spectators whispered, exchanging fragments of recognition. Monroe. The name meant something. Olivia Parker recognized it too well. 20 years ago. That name was in her brother's letters. Those letters described courage under fire. A woman who pulled wounded men to safety while bullets chewed the dirt around them. Monroe had been a savior. Today, she was a defendant. No one in the courtroom had expected this confrontation. Certainly not Evelyn. She was here because it was cold, because the law left no room for survival on the margins. Yet her quiet answer had detonated the room's assumptions. The bailiff shifted his stance. The clerk avoided eye contact. The judge's gavel remained untouched. The judge asked the defense if counsel was present. The assigned public defender had been diverted elsewhere. Evelyn had no one. She said so without apology, across the room. The prosecutor pressed on, recommending community service, proposing a no trespass order for downtown. Words fell flat. The punishment sounded petty now. Reporters noted every word. Cameras discreetly adjusted angles. Social media was already reacting. Evelyn did not flinch. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Monroe, do you wish to address the court?" she asked. Her tone was careful, but the question was sharp. Evelyn cleared her throat. "I wasn't panhandling. I wasn't bothering anyone. I was staying warm. That's all. Simple. Factual. No embellishment." The room had no clever response to honesty. Judge Parker tapped her fingers on the bench. The name Monroe echoed in her head. Pulling threads she thought had been tied off long ago. She turned a page in the file, scanning service records, dates, commendations. Every line added weight, without fanfare. The courtroom doors opened. A suited man entered briskly, placing his briefcase on the defense table. "Your Honor, Alexander Rossi, representing Miss Monroe," he announced. No one had summoned him. He volunteered nothing more. This was not routine. The judge raised an eyebrow. "This court was not informed of your appearance. It's a recent development. Your Honor, I request a brief recess to confer with my client." The room absorbed this new twist. Evelyn looked confused. She had no money, certainly not for Rossi. A name known in veteran advocacy circles. The judge nodded once. 15 minutes recess. The gavel struck, wooden, final, as the gallery stirred. Whispers rose to a low hum. Reporters had shifted into high gear. The case had mutated. A simple charge now intersected with military honor, systemic neglect, and public conscience. Evelyn remained at the defense table, wrists resting on the surface, calm amid the noise. Judge Parker exited swiftly. In her chambers, she pulled open a locked drawer, retrieving a photograph worn thin by years of handling. Her brother, Lieutenant Jack Parker, arm draped around a woman in marine dress blues. The caption beneath was faded, but the name remained Evelyn Monroe outside. The courtroom adjusted to its new reality. This was no longer about vagrancy. The system had summoned a ghost it wasn't ready to face. One name had turned a trivial case into a reckoning, and no one in Courtroom 4C could pretend otherwise. What followed would not be simple. 15 minutes later, Courtroom 4C resumed. The air was sharper now, no more idle chatter. Every pair of eyes followed Evelyn Monroe as she returned to the defense table, this time with Alexander Rossi at her side. The prosecutor wasted no time. He launched into his argument, voice firmer than before, but edged with caution. "Miss Monroe has been cited 3 times this year for loitering behind the Jefferson Street Cafe. The establishment has filed formal complaints. She was found there again, late at night, after warnings to vacate." He kept his tone neutral, but it was clear even he felt the weight of who he was addressing. This was no longer an anonymous vagrant. This was a decorated Marine. He omitted one fact. Of course, that Monroe had never panhandled, never harassed customers. She sat near the kitchen vents, warming her hands in the exhaust on freezing nights. A simple human act now wrapped in legal jargon. Rossi rose, calm, deliberate. "Your Honor, intent matters." Miss Monroe wasn't soliciting, obstructing, or posing any threat. She was sitting, quietly, seeking warmth. That's not criminal conduct. That's survival. The judge nodded slowly but said nothing. She flipped a page in Evelyn's file, reading a line twice. Then her gaze returned to the defendant. "Miss Monroe." "Why that location?" Olivia Parker asked. Her tone had softened, but her posture remained judicial. Evelyn's answer came without embellishment. "Because Jimmy leaves food there sometimes. His father served with me in Desert Storm. He taught the boy to look out for his own." That landed. Rossi said nothing. He knew when to let truth stand unassisted. The prosecutor shifted. "Regardless, Your Honor, this is her third infraction this year. We propose community service and a 30-day no trespass order for the downtown district. A no trespass order, clean, simple, bureaucratic. But the implications were brutal. It would sever Evelyn from the only shelter she had left, the soup kitchen, the church meals, her lifelines. Judge Parker understood that instantly. Her eyes narrowed. "Miss Monroe, your service record indicates deployment in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant, multiple commendations." Her voice was even, but each word was a deliberate reminder. Evelyn straightened slightly. The cuffs clinked. "Yes, ma'am." "And injuries sustained during those tours: shrapnel, left hip, TBI from an IED blast, PTSD officially documented, though it took them years to put that in writing." "No anger? Just facts." Rossi leaned forward. "Your Honor, given Miss Monroe's service history, the prosecution's proposed restrictions would not only be punitive, but life-threatening." The prosecutor interjected. Frustrated, her military service, while commendable, is not relevant to the charges. "That was a mistake." Judge Parker's tone shifted. "On the contrary, counselor. It is entirely relevant when discussing intent, circumstances, and proportionality of response. The court will consider it." She turned back to Evelyn. "Staff Sergeant Monroe, do you have representation from the VA?" A faint, sardonic smile. "Not for lack of trying." "Your Honor, bureaucracy moves slow, especially when you're not in a suit." Rossi spoke up. "Our firm is initiating immediate contact with the VA on her behalf." The judge absorbed this. The gallery was silent. The story had become too raw for side conversations. Then, without warning, a man rose from the public seating, mid-60s, Marine Corps League jacket, face lined by time but unmistakable in its resolve. Permission to speak. "Your Honor." He called out. Judge Parker considered. "State your name." "Master Gunnery Sergeant Paul Harlan. Retired. I served with Monroe, Fallujah, 2004. That shifted the air, the courtroom, moments ago rigid with formalities, now leaned forward. "She saved 6 of us. We were pinned down." She didn't hesitate. Took a round herself, pulling me to cover. None of us would be here if not for her. The judge allowed it to hang. The prosecutor, out of his depth now, attempted to regain control. "Your Honor, with respect, this is not the forum for." Olivia raised a hand. The interruption died mid-sentence. "This court recognizes the relevance of first-hand testimony regarding the defendant's character and service." She looked back to Evelyn. For a moment, the veneer of judicial distance cracked. "Staff Sergeant Monroe, this country owed you better than this." Evelyn's reply was simple. "I wasn't looking for favors, just warmth." That truth cut deeper than any legal argument. Judge Parker set down her gavel. Fingers steepled. "This case is no longer a matter of loitering. It is a matter of dignity. The dignity of service members who should not be forced into the margins for surviving the aftermath of their sacrifice." The room was frozen. "We will reconvene after a short recess," she declared. "But understand this, the lens through which this case is viewed has changed." The gavel struck once, as people stood. Whispers filled the vacuum. What had begun as a nuisance case had become an indictment of societal neglect. Evelyn remained seated, unmoved by the shift. For her, this wasn't about victory. It was about visibility. The storm had been named Evelyn Monroe, and the courtroom would soon feel its full weight. What followed would not be dismissed as easily as the charges on paper when Courtroom 4C reconvened. The atmosphere had changed. The case was no longer small. Reporters who'd ignored it now lined the back wall. Laptops opened, phones were recording. Every seat was filled. Evelyn Monroe sat quietly, flanked by Alexander Rossi, the attorney no one had expected. The clerk's voice broke the tension. Resuming docket 18B, City of Fairhaven versus Evelyn Monroe. The prosecutor stood fast. He needed control back. Your Honor, the facts remain simple. The defendant repeatedly violated city ordinances. Property owners have filed official complaints. Prior warnings were ignored. He paused, then pressed harder. Regardless of her military record, she has disrupted local businesses. This court cannot excuse repeated offenses on the basis of past service. Rossi rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client did not disrupt anything. She sat quietly in an alley, out of sight, seeking basic warmth. She posed no threat. She made no demands. That's not defiance. That's survival. His tone was measured, but his words landed with force. The gallery felt it. So did the press. Judge Parker eyed both men. The issue of trespassing remains. Does the defense have testimony to address this before Rossi could answer? The rear doors opened. A young man in a stained cafe apron stepped forward, head high despite visible nerves. Your Honor, my name's Jimmy Torres. I work at the Jefferson Street Cafe. Miss Monroe never caused trouble. She never asked for anything. I gave her leftover sandwiches because my dad served with her in Desert Storm. He told me if I ever met Evelyn Monroe, I owed her everything. The gallery absorbed this in silence. It was no longer theory. This was personal. Judge Parker's gaze sharpened. Did the cafe owner authorize her presence? Jimmy shook his head. He knew. As long as she didn't bother customers. He didn't mind. She never did. The prosecutor tried to pivot. A business owner's tolerance is not legal consent, Rossi countered instantly. An employee's consistent actions, acknowledged by management, establish implied consent. This is legal precedent, Your Honor. The weight shifted again. Judge Parker read the file in front of her. Lips pursed. She knew this wasn't about sandwiches. It was about how easily dignity is dismissed. She looked up. Miss Monroe. Why not seek shelter through official channels? Evelyn's answer was flat. I did. VA said they'd call back. That was 3 years ago. No embellishment. Just a simple indictment of a system that had failed. The courtroom realized this wasn't a homeless problem. This was a country problem. One woman in cuffs was exposing how service ends the day the uniform comes off. But the battle never does. Enough, Judge Parker said. Voice steeled. This court acknowledges the defendant's service. It will factor into my ruling. The prosecutor opened his mouth again, but Parker raised a hand. The message was clear. Proceed carefully. Rossi wasn't finished. Your Honor, dismissing these charges is not charity. It is correction. Evelyn Monroe doesn't need pity. She needs this court to recognize reality. The room felt it. Monroe remained still. But the tide had turned. Very well, Parker said. This court will issue a decision shortly. For now, we recess, but before she struck the gavel, her eyes narrowed. Mr. Rossi, your firm's name includes Parker. Any relation to this court? A ripple moved through the gallery. Rossi answered without hesitation. Thomas Parker was my law partner. And your husband, if I recall correctly. A quiet murmur swept through the seats. Connections snapped into place. The judge's composure didn't break, but the impact was felt. "Thank you for the disclosure. Mr. Rossi," she said, tone clipped, with a sharp strike of the gavel. The courtroom exhaled. Recess as people stood. Chatter ignited. This was no longer a vagrancy hearing. It was about systemic failure. It was about debt of honor, of neglect, of responsibility. Evelyn didn't move. She had been through real battles. This was just noise. Outside the chamber, reporters were already reframing the headline. The city of Fairhaven wasn't prosecuting a vagrant anymore. They were on trial for forgetting who Evelyn Monroe was, and Judge Parker knew it, but the real reckoning was only minutes away, behind the heavy oak door of her chambers. Judge Olivia Parker exhaled slowly. Alone now, stripped of courtroom formality. She allowed herself the honesty no one would see. She had known exactly who Evelyn Monroe was the moment that name filled courtroom 4C. Sergeant Evelyn Monroe, the woman who once dragged her brother from the kill zone in Fallujah. The woman Jack had written about with reverence, calling her the reason he lived 2 weeks longer. That recognition had hit her instantly, but what Olivia hadn't been prepared for was the blunt, bureaucratic cruelty of what followed, on her desk. Evelyn's case file lay open, not the thin packet of charges trespassing, public disturbance, meaningless infractions, but the thicker, heavier record beneath it. Service documents, deployment histories, awards, injuries, a lifetime of sacrifice reduced to lines of sterile text. Olivia's fingers rested on the citation for Evelyn's Navy commendation. She traced the embossed seal, remembering how similar words had been read aloud at her brother's funeral. The folded flag, the rehearsed condolences, all the symbols of gratitude that evaporated once the ceremony ended. Evelyn Monroe had been the hero that day. And yet here she was now, presented to this court as a nuisance, a file full of commendations stacked beneath citations for loitering. The contradiction burned. Olivia had seen the system work exactly as designed, efficient, detached, indifferent. It issued orders, it dispensed judgment, it rarely looked back. Veterans like Evelyn weren't exceptions. They were casualties of paperwork, of funding gaps, of a society that thanked its soldiers and then moved on. Her gaze fell on the VA correspondence Rossi had submitted, denied claims, lost appeals, years of radio silence. Each stamped rejection was a quiet betrayal. The military had honored Evelyn with medals. The country had honored her with neglect. Olivia leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For 20 years, she had worn these robes with the belief that justice, however slow, eventually corrected itself. Today, that belief felt thin. At her fingertips sat the power to dismiss Evelyn's charges. Legally simple, but morally insufficient. Evelyn didn't need a quiet dismissal. She needed the truth exposed. She needed acknowledgement, not as a footnote, not as a casualty of oversight, but as the embodiment of a debt unpaid. Olivia's mind flashed to that moment after Jack's funeral. She remembered the woman in uniform who had stood apart from the official detail. A firm handshake. Eyes that had seen too much. "Your brother was one of the good ones," Evelyn had said simply. Then she had walked away. No speech, no self-congratulation, just quiet respect. That same woman now sat in her courtroom, treated as a criminal for surviving in the cracks of a system that failed her. Evelyn Monroe had not vanished. She had been systematically erased, and if this courtroom allowed that erasure to continue, Olivia would be complicit. She closed the file. The choice was clear. This case would not proceed as a routine municipal infraction. Not today. Olivia stood, adjusting the weight of her robes. Out in the gallery, reporters were sharpening their angles, but the story wouldn't be theirs to spin. Not this time. Before exiting, Olivia picked up her phone. A number she hadn't dialed in years rang twice before a voice answered. "Colonel Matthews," she said. "Yes, it's Olivia Parker." "No, this isn't social. I need a favor. Right now." She ended the call before explanations could dilute her resolve. Today. The city of Fairhaven would remember Evelyn Monroe, and through her, every veteran it had chosen not to see. When Olivia stepped back into Courtroom 4C, the proceedings would not be routine. They would be corrective. The charges against Evelyn were small, but what Olivia was about to put on record would not be. Inside the judge's conference room, Olivia Parker and Alexander Rossi stood over a single manila folder. The courtroom outside simmered with tension. But in here, the plan was taking shape. "You called Matthews," Rossi said, though it wasn't a question. "He's already moving," Olivia replied. "I want this court record to reflect every failure, every ignored appeal. Fairhaven won't walk away from this untouched." Rossi slid a document forward. "We have the timeline. Monroe's initial PTSD claim was filed 4 months after her last tour, buried under processing backlog for 3 years, denied without full evaluation." Olivia scanned the line, clinical, detached, exactly how bureaucracy insulated itself from responsibility. Next, she asked, "Survivor benefits, husband KIA, Afghanistan, 2007. Her paperwork misplaced after internal restructuring. Took her 2 years to get a formal rejection. No appeal processed." Olivia's fingers tapped the table, steady, deliberate. Each failed entry was a nail driven deeper. They never outright said no. Rossi continued. They stalled, deflected, death by administrative limbo. "The system didn't shoot at her," Olivia said, voice low, "but it finished the job in slow motion. That was the truth. Evelyn Monroe had survived IED blasts, ambushes, losing her husband in the same war zone she had bled in. Yet back home, her battle never ended. It merely changed weapons." "We'll put it on record," Rossi said, detail by detail. "This isn't about pity, it's about accountability." Olivia nodded. "And when Matthews walks into that courtroom with the Navy Cross, it won't be a ceremony. It'll be an indictment." They both knew optics mattered. Fairhaven's courtroom was about to become a mirror held up to the entire city. "I'll allow direct testimony," Olivia said. "Matthews, any former Marines present. We'll make it official. This case won't be sanitized into a quick dismissal." Rossi allowed himself a brief smile. About time someone used the bench for the right kind of noise. Olivia's gaze was sharp. "We don't change systems with outrage. Alex, we change them with facts too damning to ignore." He leaned back, and stories no longer whispered behind closed doors. They both knew Evelyn wouldn't ask for this. She didn't want a spotlight. But this wasn't for her ego. This was for the debt. For every denied claim. For every night she'd sat by a kitchen vent because a city had more codes than compassion. Evelyn Monroe had done her duty in war. Her country had failed to do its duty in peace. "This won't fix everything," Rossi said. "It'll fix today," Olivia countered. "And sometimes that's where you start, outside." The courtroom murmured louder. Word had spread that something was shifting. Reporters smelled it. The gallery braced for it, but none of them knew what was coming. As Olivia gathered the files, her voice softened. "I kept reading Jack's letters after he died. One line never left me. He wrote, 'Monroe would walk through fire for her team. God help anyone who leaves her standing alone.'" Rossi said nothing. The words didn't need embellishment. Olivia straightened her robes, not with detachment, with purpose. Today. This court walks with her. She reached for the door. "Are you ready?" Rossi asked. "I'm done being ready," Olivia replied. "I'm here to deliver." The gavel wouldn't strike to signal business as usual. Today, It would strike to reclaim what the system had tried to erase, and Evelyn Monroe's story would no longer be a casualty of silence. The courtroom settled into a tense hush as Judge Olivia Parker fixed her gaze on the woman seated at the defense table. For hours. The trial had been about ordinances, citations, legal jargon. That was about to change. "Staff Sergeant Monroe," Olivia began, her tone shifting from judicial formality to something sharper, more deliberate. "Your record indicates deployment to Fallujah, 2004. Confirmed by multiple sources?" Evelyn nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines." The words were plain, but the weight they carried filled the room. "I'd like you to describe, in your own words." "The events of April 17th, 2004, Olivia said, for a heartbeat. Evelyn remained silent, not in defiance, in calculation, weighing whether truth still mattered in a place that had overlooked it for so long. But today, the truth would not be denied. "We were escorting a medevac convoy through the west outskirts." Evelyn began. "IEDs hit the lead vehicle. Small arms fire followed. We were pinned. No clean lines of retreat. They knew the route. Knew we'd come for our wounded." The gallery leaned forward. Breath held. "One of ours, Lieutenant Jack Parker, was moving toward a downed corpsman when he took a hit. Exposed. No cover. We had no time to think." Olivia's hands were still, but her throat tightened. "I moved to his position. Provided suppressing fire. Took a round through the left hip, but kept moving. Dragged him behind a wall. The rest of the squad regrouped. We pushed back enough to get air support. He made it onto the bird, alive. Simple, clinical. But every word carved into the room like a blade. I did what needed doing." Evelyn finished. Same as anyone else would have, but not everyone else had. "Why did you risk yourself like that?" Olivia asked. Though she already knew the answer, Evelyn's reply was ironclad. "Because you don't leave your own bleeding in the dirt. Not while you can breathe. That's the job." The courtroom was utterly silent, and after that day, Olivia pressed. Evelyn's lips thinned. 2 more tours, different sand, same war. Came home with pieces missing. Some visible, most not. Husband didn't make it back. I filled forms, checked boxes, waited for systems to notice. Her eyes scanned the courtroom. Cold. Direct. They didn't. We took the bullets for this country, but for the last 20 years, the only warmth I've known came from a brick wall vent behind a cafe kitchen. No one spoke. Olivia inhaled slowly. "Staff Sergeant Monroe, you saved my brother's life that day. His letters made it clear. He wouldn't have lasted 2 more minutes without you." Evelyn gave a small nod. "He was a good officer, took care of his men, would have done the same for me, in the gallery." A silver-haired Marine stood. His voice was steady, defiant. "I was there." Monroe didn't hesitate. "She got hit pulling us out. 6 of us made it home because of her." The ripple through the courtroom was visceral. Names were no longer abstract. Faces now stood in support. The prosecutor opened his mouth, but Olivia's gavel struck sharp. "You will hold your objection." Her voice had shifted. Not as judge, but as witness. "The city filed these charges in the name of public order. But what is order when it ignores its own defenders? This court recognizes that context cannot be sanitized for convenience." Evelyn remained seated, unmoved. She hadn't come for applause. But today, the silence was no longer dismissive. It was listening. "We will recess briefly," Olivia declared. "But know this when we return. The record will reflect not just the charges, but the full weight of this story." As the gavel echoed, Olivia's gaze met Evelyn's. This was no longer a trial about trespassing. It was a reckoning. The gallery stirred. But beneath the shifting bodies was a current of quiet respect. People who had come expecting a routine case now witnessed the anatomy of systemic failure laid bare, and those who owed Evelyn their lives were no longer content to watch in silence. When the court reconvened, Fair Haven would be forced to hear them all. The silence in courtroom 4C cracked as a single figure rose from the gallery. He moved slowly but with purpose. A silver-haired Marine. Back straight despite the years. Uniform jacket immaculate. His name wasn't called. His permission wasn't asked. But today, silence was no longer an option. Judge Olivia Parker acknowledged him with a subtle nod. "State your name for the record." "Master Gunnery Sergeant Paul Harlan, retired," he said. His voice carried not loud, but firm enough to cut through marble and doubt. "I served with Staff Sergeant Evelyn Monroe. Fallujah. 2004. No one in the room moved. Most of you don't know what that means," Harlan continued. "You see a trespassing charge, a citation, paperwork, but I see a woman who bled to get 6 of us out of a kill zone. No backup, no orders, just grit." He let the words settle. "I took a bullet through the shoulder that day. Would have taken 2 more if Monroe hadn't dragged me out. She patched me up herself while keeping the others pinned down. Saved my life, saved my family's future." Reporters who had scribbled half-hearted notes now raised their heads. Cameras shifted. Outside the courthouse, phones buzzed as the first ripples hit social media. Harlan wasn't finished. "She never asked for medals. Never asked for thanks. But this city has the nerve to drag her into court for staying warm behind a damn cafe. Shame on you." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. The weight in the room had shifted too far. From the back rows, murmurs rose, not discontent, recognition. A younger man stood. His left leg bore the unmistakable rigidity of prosthesis. He didn't wait for permission. Corporal Jason Diaz. "I was 19. Rookie. Monroe carried me after my leg was gone. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. I'm alive because she was there, one by one." Others followed, former Marines, family members. The quiet wave of voices grew, each recounting not tales of heroism, but debts unpaid. The gallery was no longer an audience, it was a formation. Reporters typed furiously. Outside, headlines shifted. Veteran on trial became veteran sacrifice ignored. The public eye was now wide open. Olivia let the room breathe before speaking. "This court recognizes every statement as part of the official record. Today, the charges are secondary to the truth now before us." Evelyn Monroe remained seated, hands steady, face unreadable. She hadn't asked for this. But those she'd once shielded refused to stay silent. The moment was not scripted. It wasn't designed for optics. That's why it struck harder than any press release could. The prosecutor attempted to reclaim ground. "Your Honor, while their service is commendable, the issue remains one of municipal law enough," Olivia said. The finality in her voice left no room for rebuttal. "The law exists to serve justice, not to camouflage indifference. What we are witnessing is not a plea for charity. It is a demand for recognition. In that instant." The courtroom felt smaller, not because of the walls, but because of the truth pressing in on every seat. Evelyn spoke at last. "I didn't bring these men here. They came because they remember, because they understand what it means to carry each other when no one else will. That doesn't change just because you come home." Her words were simple. That's why they carried weight outside. Social media exploded. Monroe case trended nationwide. Footage streamed live. Veterans groups rallied. What began as a quiet municipal hearing was now a mirror reflecting a nation's neglect. The gallery remained standing even as Olivia announced a brief recess. The symbolism wasn't lost. They stood not for spectacle, but for the woman seated before them. As Evelyn gathered her papers, Rossi leaned in. "They can't spin this anymore," he said quietly. "The city's narrative just collapsed." Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't need to. The facts now spoke louder than the accusations ever had when the court returned. Fairhaven would no longer be trying Evelyn Monroe. It would be trying itself. The courtroom doors opened quietly, but the impact was immediate. 3 men entered. Not attorneys, not reporters, Marines. Leading them was Colonel James Matthews, in full dress uniform, flanked by a master sergeant and a junior corporal. The gallery, already tense, straightened instinctively. Recognition rippled through the room. Judge Olivia Parker acknowledged them with a slight nod. "Colonel Matthews, thank you for accepting the court's invitation. Please approach." Matthews moved with the quiet authority of a man used to chaos, but not spectacle. He placed a leather-bound folder on the public defender's table, then faced the bench. "Your Honor, I appear today not as a courtesy, but as a necessity. The United States Marine Corps has reviewed the service record of Staff Sergeant Evelyn Monroe under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative." He opened the folder. Inside gleamed a citation. Crisp and recent. "Newly declassified intelligence confirms that Sergeant Monroe's actions on April 17, 2004 directly prevented the destruction of a medevac convoy under coordinated insurgent ambush. Her initial Silver Star has been reviewed and upgraded." Matthews paused, then delivered the blow. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Evelyn Monroe, United States Marine Corps, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action." The gallery murmured. The Navy Cross was second only to the Medal of Honor. No one in that courtroom had expected this to unfold here. "Now," Matthews continued, voice measured, "this court should also be aware that Sergeant Monroe's VA claims were mishandled due to administrative failure. A full audit confirms lapses that resulted in wrongful denial of benefits and services owed." He handed Olivia a sealed report. "This, Your Honor, is not just a personal correction. It's a systemic one." Olivia received the folder without ceremony. She didn't need drama to know the weight of what was now official record. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. "Your testimony and documentation will be entered into the court record." The prosecutor stood, pale but defiant. "Your Honor, while Sergeant Monroe's military service is exemplary, the matter before us concerns municipal code violations." Matthews turned, his bars gleaming. "Counselor, with respect, the codes you reference exist to maintain public order. But when they are enforced in a manner that ignores the human cost of service, they fail their purpose." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. From the gallery, reporters captured every word. Social media exploded. Monroe case surged again, now with photos of the Navy Cross ceremony happening in real time. In the middle of a courtroom built for parking disputes and minor infractions, Evelyn remained seated, unmoved by the spectacle. Recognition wasn't why she had shown up, but ignoring it wouldn't change the truth. Olivia spoke, her voice firm. "This court acknowledges the Marine Corps' findings. Staff Sergeant Monroe's service has been grossly mishandled by both federal and municipal institutions." She looked directly at the prosecutor. "The city's interest in maintaining public order does not supersede its responsibility to those who defended that order at great personal cost." Matthews stepped back. Mission complete. But the ripple effects had only begun. Fairhaven's legal counsel exchanged urgent whispers. Outside, city officials drafted statements in panic. What had started as a quiet nuisance case was now a national symbol of bureaucratic failure. Rossi leaned toward Evelyn. "They can't bury this now." Matthews made sure of it. Evelyn's response was simple. Took them long enough. The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but the verdict was no longer in doubt. The question now was not if the charges would be dismissed, but how the city would recover from the exposure. Olivia signaled for order. "This court will reconvene in 15 minutes to issue its final ruling. In the meantime, all new documentation will be entered into the official record." As Matthews exited, the gallery stood not as a formality, but as respect. Fairhaven had tried to reduce Evelyn Monroe to a citation number. Today, the system was being forced to remember the names it had filed away, and this time, it wouldn't be able to look away. 2 days after the courtroom erupted, Evelyn Monroe sat across from a polished oak table inside the Veterans Affairs Regional Office. The space was immaculate, designed to suggest order, competence, efficiency. Evelyn knew better. On her side of the table, Alexander Rossi, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp. On the other, David Ellsworth, Regional VA Director, flanked by 2 senior claims officers. Their posture was formal, their tone apologetic, but beneath it all, Evelyn sensed the familiar dance of damage control. "Miss Monroe," Ellsworth began. "First, let me extend a formal apology on behalf of the department. The mishandling of your claims was inexcusable. We are committed to rectifying these errors immediately." Evelyn said nothing. She had heard promises before. Words were cheap. Action was currency. Rossi didn't waste time. "We'll skip the ceremonial regret. What's your plan for restitution?" Ellsworth shifted, adjusting papers, effective immediately. Ms. Monroe's disability rating will be reassessed at 100% service-connected, retroactive to her discharge date. Back pay, medical coverage, housing allowance all calculated with compounded adjustments for delays. One of the claims officers slid a printed breakdown across the table. Rossi scanned it, brow lifting slightly. The figures were substantial, more than they'd expected. Evelyn's gaze didn't flicker. Money was a resource, not a resolution. "What about survivor benefits?" Rossi pressed. "The oversight in Captain Monroe's file has been corrected." Ellsworth replied, "Full entitlements will be dispersed retroactively. Additionally, we're expediting enrollment in the Veteran Transition Program, should Ms. Monroe choose to participate." Evelyn finally spoke. "Should I choose to?" Her tone was flat, not confrontational, just tired of institutions framing her survival as a choice. Ellsworth cleared his throat. "Of course, participation is voluntary, but we believe it offers valuable resources for reintegration." Reintegration? The word echoed with unintended irony. Evelyn hadn't left society. Society had left her. "Let me be clear," Rossi said. "Every delay, every lost document, every denial without merit will be accounted for. We're not here for good faith gestures. We're here for accountability." Ellsworth nodded, though discomfort flickered. "Understood. Mr. Rossi, in addition, we're initiating an internal audit of all cases flagged under the same criteria. Ms. Monroe's file exposed systemic issues we're obligated to address." Obligated. A sterile word for something long overdue. Evelyn leaned back. "What you're doing now isn't generosity, it's correction. Don't frame it as anything else." The VA officers exchanged glances. The power dynamics had shifted. This was no longer a closed-door formality. Public scrutiny lingered outside those walls, sharper than any court order. Rossi closed the file. Timeline: initial disbursements within 14 days. Full adjustment cycle completed within 90, Ellsworth said. "Make it 60, Rossi countered. "You've delayed her life enough." There was no pushback, as the meeting drew to a close. Ellsworth extended a hand. Evelyn regarded it for a beat, then shook it, not out of courtesy, out of closure, walking out of the building. Sunlight struck the medals now restored to her name, not as decoration, but as documentation of a debt acknowledged. On the sidewalk, Rossi matched her pace. They moved fast because they had no choice. They always had a choice. Evelyn replied. They just preferred silence until it cost them something. A few steps ahead. Jimmy Torres waited by a food cart, waving them over. His smile was wide. Genuine. In his hand. 2 paper cups of coffee. You've got the city talking. Sarge, Jimmy said. Not bad for someone they tried to ignore. Evelyn accepted the coffee. I didn't ask for that noise. No. Jimmy grinned. But sometimes, the right kind of noise is what gets things done. Across the street, a local news crew was setting up. The city's attention hadn't faded. Not yet. Stories like Evelyn's had a way of sticking when they were forced into the light. Rossi checked his watch. The legal side's handled. But this isn't where it ends. Evelyn nodded. No, but it's where it stops being their secret. Justice delayed was a familiar wound. But justice treated as optional, that was intolerable, today. The system had been cornered into remembering, and Evelyn Monroe was the reason why. The old cafe on Jefferson Street had never hosted a crowd like this. Once a quiet stop for regulars seeking black coffee and worn vinyl booths. Today, its back room had been hastily cleared to make space for folding chairs, tripods, and a handful of media crews squeezing into corners. The city had tried to move on from Evelyn Monroe's trial. But the people in this room weren't ready to forget, near the counter. A small makeshift stage had been set, just a simple platform, a standing mic, and a projection screen showing an old photo. Marines, dust-streaked uniforms, in the center. A younger Evelyn Monroe. Her arms slung around the shoulders of a wide-eyed private, Jimmy Torres adjusted the mic, clearing his throat. He wasn't used to this. His place was the kitchen, behind the stove. Not in front of cameras, but today was different. Afternoon. Everyone. Thanks for coming, he began, voice steady despite the nerves. Most of you know me as the guy flipping omelets back there. But today, I'm here for something more important than breakfast specials. The crowd was a mix: veterans, neighbors, reporters, even passers-by who had followed the story online. Fairhaven had turned up not for headlines, but for connection. Jimmy pointed to the photo behind him. That's my dad, Raul Torres. He was 19 in this picture. First tour. Scared as hell, though he wouldn't admit it. The woman next to him, Sergeant Evelyn Monroe, made sure he came home. The room quieted. In 2004, Dad's squad was ambushed outside Fallujah, pinned down. No support, no clear path out, from what I've been told. Most would have waited for orders, not Monroe. She pulled them out herself, took a bullet doing it. Jimmy's eyes scanned the room, catching the nods of older veterans who didn't need to hear details. They knew the story by heart, growing up. Dad didn't talk much about the war, but whenever Monroe's name came up, he'd get quiet, not sad, not angry, just respectful. If Monroe hadn't been there, you wouldn't be here. Son. That's what he'd say, every time. He paused, letting that truth settle. This cafe became more than just a place to eat. It became a place where folks like my dad, men and women who owed Monroe their lives, would gather. Not to swap war stories, just to be close, to remember. Quietly. A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. Some had seen Evelyn sitting by the back vent, coffee cup in hand, never asking for help. but never invisible to those who knew. For years. Monroe never asked for anything. She didn't need to. We found ways to say thanks without words. A hot meal left on the ledge, a scarf in the winter, small things. Things the city never saw. Jimmy's voice firmed. But when Fairhaven dragged her into court for trespassing, they didn't realize they weren't just targeting one woman. They were insulting a whole community that never forgot her. Behind him, the screen changed. Photos of Monroe appeared not in uniform, but among people, helping carry groceries, fixing a broken chair at the cafe, standing silently at a veteran's funeral. "This isn't charity," Jimmy said. "It's respect. It's debt." Monroe stood for people when bullets were flying. "We stand for her now." Reporters typed furiously. This wasn't a press conference. It was an answer. For my family. Monroe isn't a headline. She's the reason I'm here. The reason my kids know their grandfather. And I know we're not the only ones. From the back. A man in his 60s stood. He wore no uniform. But his bearing was unmistakable. "She pulled me out in Ho 5, different squad, same story, saved my life." Another voice joined. "My brother, too, 2007. She kept his tour from being his last. The room wasn't an audience anymore. It was a chorus." Jimmy smiled, though his tone remained serious. One action. One person deciding not to look away. That's what starts a legacy. Monroe didn't do it for medals. She did it because it was right. But a country that accepts those sacrifices has a responsibility to remember them. He gestured around. "That's why we're launching Monroe House, a shelter and support center for veterans, named not because she asked, but because it's long overdue." Applause broke out, not polite, but genuine. This was no longer a story about Evelyn Monroe being forgotten. It was about ensuring no one else would be. Reporters rushed to capture the announcement. Hashtags exploded anew. But for Jimmy, the focus was simple. When you save a life, you change the world for every person who comes after. Monroe did that. Quietly, relentlessly. Today, we return the favor. As the event wound down, Evelyn sat in a corner booth, as she always had, away from the center, watching, listening. Rossi slid into the seat across from her. "Congratulations, Sergeant. You've got a building named after you now." Evelyn shook her head. "Don't need my name on a wall." "No," Rossi agreed, "but the people inside will—" That's the difference, outside the cafe. Passers-by paused to read the freshly printed sign, Monroe House. No one left behind. The city had finally remembered, but memory was only the first step. Recognition had arrived. Respect had begun. And Evelyn Monroe's story would never again be filed under forgotten. The apartment was small but clean. Simple furniture, bare walls, save for one section where newly mounted medals gleamed under soft afternoon light. The Navy Cross sat in the center, flanked by 2 Purple Hearts and a battered service photo of a younger Evelyn Monroe. No more donation bins, no more borrowed corners behind cafe vents. This space was hers now. Evelyn sat by the window, watching Fairhaven move without her. For years, she had been invisible. The city passed her by. Today, she watched it with a different kind of quiet. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. "Come in." "Parker," Evelyn called. The door opened, revealing Olivia Parker in civilian clothes. No robe, no gavel, just a woman carrying a small box, hands careful, face unreadable. "I hope I'm not intruding," Olivia said. "You brought that damn box." "Of course you're intruding." But Evelyn gestured to the chair opposite her. It wasn't hostility, just her version of welcome. Olivia sat. placing the box on the small coffee table between them. She took a breath. These are letters. From Jack. My brother, written during his last deployment. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. I remember Jack. Good man. Good officer. There are things in these letters no one outside my family has read, Olivia said. Until now. She opened the box, revealing a stack of envelopes, some yellowed with age, others so thin they seemed barely held together. Olivia chose one, unfolding it with care. March 20th, 2004, 2 weeks before Fallujah. She began to read. Dear Liv, the sand gets everywhere, between your teeth, your boots, your thoughts. But there's one constant out here, Monroe, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Monroe. She doesn't say much, but when she does, people listen. You know why? Because she moves first, always. No hesitation, no grand speeches, just action. Olivia glanced up. Evelyn's expression was still, but something in her eyes had shifted. He admired you, Evelyn, not for the medals, for the way you led. Evelyn said nothing. Olivia continued. Today, we lost a kid, fresh in. Monroe didn't flinch. She rallied the team, patched us up, kept us moving, she told me after. Pain's just proof you're not done yet. I think about that more than I should. The room was silent. The city outside had no idea that in this small apartment, fragments of war were being pieced together not as strategy, but as human connection. I didn't know he wrote that, Evelyn admitted. Voice rough. There's more, Olivia said, selecting another letter. April 18th, 2004. Liv, yesterday. Monroe saved my life. That's not hyperbole. We were caught in a kill zone. I moved without thinking. Got hit. She pulled me out, took her round herself, refused to fall back. She says no Marine gets left behind, and she lives it. Because of her. I'm writing this letter because of her. I'll see you again. Olivia paused. He never came home. Evelyn. 2 weeks later. The IED took him. But those 2 weeks mattered. They mattered to him. They mattered to us. Evelyn's hands rested on her knees, fingers curled tightly. The room felt heavier. I always wondered if pulling him out was the right call. Evelyn said, Didn't know if I bought him time or stole it. You didn't steal anything, Olivia replied. You gave him more, and you gave us those 2 weeks. You gave us closure. She placed the letter gently on the table. Jack wrote one more thing. Something I think you need to hear. She unfolded the final page. Liv, if I don't make it. Remember this, Monroe is the kind of Marine who'd carry a man through hell and never ask why? If we had more like her. Maybe this war would have ended differently, if you ever meet her outside this place. Remind her that what she does matters even when the world looks away. Olivia folded the paper slowly. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was acknowledgement. You carried a lot more than you should have. Evelyn, Olivia said softly. That's the job. Evelyn replied. No, Olivia corrected. That was the excuse. The job ended when you came home. The debt didn't. Evelyn leaned back, exhaling slowly. Funny thing. Parker. I never wanted recognition, but being forgotten. That wears you down. You're not forgotten. Not anymore. For a moment. There was no prosecutor, no courtroom, no headlines, just two people connected by loss and quiet gratitude. Olivia gestured to the medals on the wall. These aren't decorations. They're reminders. But they're not enough. That's why the Monroe House matters. Why the Veterans Initiative is moving forward. Evelyn's brow lifted. They're actually doing it, Olivia nodded. The city's been shamed into action. State-level policies are following: priority housing, streamlined claims, community integration programs, not because they found religion, because they found your story impossible to ignore. Evelyn allowed a faint smile. Never thought a stubborn old Marine could move a bureaucracy. You didn't move it, Olivia said. You bulldozed it. They shared a moment of rare, quiet amusement. I've got one more thing for you, Olivia added, reaching into her bag. She produced a slim, official-looking envelope. Congressional inquiry. Your case sparked a national review. You might be called to testify. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Testify I'm not a politician. They're not asking for a politician. They're asking for the truth. Evelyn considered that. I can give them that. Might not like hearing it. Though, that's why they need it. The afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the apartment. But for once, those shadows didn't feel like something closing in. Evelyn reached for the stack of letters, not to read them all, just to hold them. You know, Parker, she said quietly. Those words Jack wrote between the sand and the bullets feel more real now than any medal ever did. Sometimes, Olivia replied, a letter from a battlefield can heal more than a courtroom ever could. They sat in comfortable silence, two people bound by memory, but finally seeing it not as a wound, but as a foundation, outside. Fairhaven continued as always, but here, in this small apartment, Pride had found a new home, not in glory, not in applause, but in the simple truth that Evelyn Monroe was no longer a name the city could afford to forget. And soon. Neither could the nation. The rain had started lightly, tapping against the apartment windows in a rhythm that Evelyn Monroe knew by heart. For years, it had been the only sound that didn't remind her of war. Today, it seemed different, softer, less intrusive. Olivia Parker sat opposite her, the box of Jack's letters now closed, resting between them. The air was quieter, but the weight of what had been read lingered. I never told you how Jack died, Olivia said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but the edges of her words carried something deeper. Not the official version, the real one. Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't have to. Olivia was ready to speak, not as a judge, but as a sister. It was a mission outside Ramadi, April 30th, 2004. Insurgents had been targeting civilian convoys' medical supplies, food routes. Jack's unit was tasked with sweeping a sector notorious for ambushes. High risk, minimal intel. She paused, eyes distant, as if seeing the dusty streets through the rain-streaked glass. Jack wasn't supposed to lead that patrol. His CO was scheduled to, but Jack volunteered. No orders, just stepped up when I asked why, later. The answer was always the same. Because it was the right thing to do. Evelyn's hands tightened around her coffee cup. The words were too familiar. Reports said his squad encountered an IED, but the truth is, Jack saw a civilian vehicle, a family being funneled into a kill zone. He took point, redirected his team to cover their exit. That's when his Humvee hit the secondary device. Olivia's voice held steady, but her fingers betrayed her, curling tightly against her lap. They said he died instantly. Quick, clean. But what matters to me isn't how he died. It's why. He moved because he couldn't stand still, because the idea of watching someone else bleed while he stayed safe was unbearable. She looked at Evelyn, eyes sharp. That's what you taught him. Evelyn shook her head slowly. I didn't teach him anything fancy, just did what Marines do. No, Olivia said. You showed him what duty means beyond the battlefield. You pulled him out of Fallujah because no Marine gets left behind. That wasn't a motto to him. It became his compass. The rain picked up. A soft percussion beneath their conversation. "You see, Evelyn," Olivia continued, "when you saved Jack, you didn't just save his life. You gave him the chance to decide what that life would stand for. And when his moment came, he chose to be the one who moved first." Evelyn's eyes dropped to the table. For years, she had carried the weight of that rescue. The doubt, the guilt. But hearing it now, reframed through Olivia's words. Something shifted. Saving someone isn't just pulling them out of the dirt, Olivia said softly. It's giving them the strength to stand for something when it matters. For a long moment, they sat without speaking. The truth didn't need to be loud. It had already been earned. "I always thought," Evelyn began, voice low, "that maybe I bought him time that didn't belong to him, like I delayed the inevitable." Olivia leaned forward. "You gave him time to live by choice, not by chance." "That's not delaying. That's defining." Evelyn allowed the words to settle. She had spent years avoiding platitudes, wary of empty condolences. But this wasn't that. This was clarity. "You've been so focused on surviving," Olivia continued. "But you need to understand your legacy isn't in medals or courtrooms. It's in the choices people made because of you. Jack was one of them. But there are more. Jimmy, his father, every Marine who ever watched you move first. Outside, the city kept its rhythm, oblivious. But inside this modest apartment, history was being redefined not as something written by officials, but as something carried in quiet decisions." Evelyn's voice broke the quiet. "You think that's enough legacy? I think it's more than enough," Olivia replied. "But it's not finished." From her bag, Olivia pulled a sealed envelope, thicker than the others. "This is from the Department of Defense, an official request. They want you to speak at the National Veterans Policy Summit, not as a guest, as the keynote." Evelyn's brow lifted. "You're joking. I'm not." "The Monroe case has become a catalyst. Policy reviews, veteran care reforms, it's moving. Slowly, but moving. They want the woman who reminded a city what duty looks like to remind the nation." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "I'm no speaker. You don't need to be eloquent. You need to be honest, like you've always been." There was no pressure in Olivia's tone, just a recognition that this was the next step not for ceremony, but for consequence. "I'll think about it," Evelyn said, but in her voice. There was less resistance than before. Olivia smiled faintly. "That's all I ask." As the rain eased, Olivia stood, gathering the letters back into the box with care. Before she left, she paused at the door. "Evelyn, you saved my brother once, but this recognition, these reforms, it's saving you back, from being forgotten, from being reduced to a footnote. And you deserve that." Evelyn didn't reply immediately, but as the door clicked shut, she looked toward the wall where her medals hung for the first time. She didn't see them as relics. She saw them as reflections of choices, of lives touched, of debts being repaid. Saving a life wasn't just about the moment. It was about what came after, today. Evelyn Monroe was no longer fighting to be remembered. Today, she was being remembered for what truly mattered. The mirror was small, functional. Its frame was nothing more than plain wood, the kind found in low-income housing. Yet today, it held a reflection Evelyn Monroe had never truly faced for years. She had passed by mirrors without looking, not out of vanity, but out of practicality. Survival didn't require reflection. It required movement, one foot in front of the other, always forward, never back, but now. with the afternoon light filtering through clean windows. Evelyn stood still. What she saw was not the woman the city had dismissed, not the trespasser, not the vagrant huddled behind a cafe vent. Before her stood Staff Sergeant Evelyn Monroe, United States Marine Corps, retired. But never relinquished, the scars remained both the visible ones and those no one would ever see. But they no longer defined her. They had become part of the whole, not the sum. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. "Come in, Parker," Evelyn said, not turning. Olivia entered quietly, carrying no folders, no formalities. Today, she brought only presents. "I thought I'd find you here," Olivia said, approaching. "Where else would I be?" Evelyn replied, eyes still on her reflection. They stood side by side, two women bound by history, by loss, by reclamation. "I wanted to see how you were holding up before the summit next week," Olivia said. Evelyn's lips curled slightly. "It's just words." "Parker, won't change the world." "No." Olivia agreed, "but they'll remind it. Sometimes that's enough." A long silence settled. Comfortable. Earned. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "You know what I realized today for so long? I thought being remembered meant ceremonies, medals, speeches, turns out. It's simpler than that." She touched the edge of the mirror, her fingers tracing her own reflection. "It's someone stopping long enough to say my name, to look me in the eye and see me, not the jacket, not the citation. Me." Her voice was calm, solid. Someone remembered my name, unlike the bitter murmurs of the past. This time, the words carried no sorrow, no accusation, only quiet pride. Olivia smiled. "Fairhaven will remember. The Monroe house will make sure of it. And beyond that, Jimmy, his kids, the people you saved. Their lives carry your name in ways no plaque ever could." Evelyn turned, facing her fully now. The weight she had carried alone for so long was no longer invisible, but more importantly, it was no longer hers to bear alone. "Funny thing," Evelyn said, "I used to think standing tall was about posture, about defiance. Now I see it's about knowing you don't have to fight every battle by yourself." Olivia's eyes softened. "No one should have to." They sat by the window, watching the city move. The same streets that once ignored her presence now bore echoes of her name, not in banners or billboards, but in the quiet acknowledgement of a community forced to remember. "I keep thinking about Jack." Evelyn said, "About how he chose to move forward. Not because someone told him to, because it was right." "That's the legacy you gave him," Olivia replied. Evelyn shook her head. "He chose his own path. I just showed him there's a choice, and now you're giving that choice to others," Olivia said. "Through the Monroe house, through your story, for the first time." Evelyn allowed herself to believe it. Beyond the summit, beyond the headlines, there was something enduring, a shift, small, but real as the light faded. Olivia stood to leave. "One last thing." "Evelyn," she said, pausing by the door. "You've always stood for the people beside you. Now, it's time to let them stand for you." Evelyn didn't reply. She simply nodded, the motion carrying more than words ever could. When the door closed, she turned back to the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't a hero in the storybook sense. She was something more grounded, more lasting. A survivor, a leader, a name reclaimed. Evelyn straightened her shoulders not out of habit, but out of choice. The world hadn't changed overnight. But for the first time in years, Evelyn Monroe wasn't fighting to be seen. She was seen, she was heard, and that was enough, because honor doesn't demand glory. It asks only to be remembered, and in that quiet apartment, under the fading glow of a city forced to remember. Evelyn Monroe stood tall, not as a symbol, but as herself. Someone remembered her name. And this time, it was right, outside. Life continued. Unremarkable, relentless. But Evelyn smiled, because now, no one gets left behind, especially not by the place they called home. Evelyn Monroe never asked for recognition. She didn't chase medals or ceremonies. All she wanted for 2 long decades was for someone to stop, say her name, and truly see her, because saving a life isn't just about pulling someone from the line of fire. It's about reminding them that they matter, that they're not invisible. Evelyn did that for her fellow Marines, for Jack Parker, for people like Jimmy, who learned what it means to stand for something, even when no one is watching. And today, after all the silence, Evelyn herself was saved not from bullets, but from being forgotten. Not by grand speeches, but by simple truth. Honor doesn't need glory. It only needs to be seen, to be remembered. Evelyn's story might end here, but its lesson does not. In every town, every city, how many more like her are being left behind? How many quiet heroes stand alone? Not because they chose to, but because we chose to look away now. It's your turn to speak. Have you ever witnessed someone who gave so much for others, yet was quietly forgotten by society? Share their story in the comments below. Let's make sure their name is remembered. If Evelyn's journey moved you, please leave a like, share this video with those who believe gratitude still matters, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that give voice to the unheard, because no one should be left behind, especially not by the place they once called home.